Be sure to check out my second channel called Rob Explains. There you can check out videos where I explain things outside of comic books. So continuing our discussion of comparing the Walking Dead TV show to the comics, following the shooting of Carl by Otis, where the TV show saw this multi-episode event featuring Shane and Otis running to a local high school that served as a FEMA shelter during the outbreak in order to locate a respirator, extra surgical supplies, and medicine due to the fact that the bullet had fragmented and hit an artery. In the comics, this didn't happen. Herschel fixed up Carl right away without any of all that stuff. While there was somewhat of a waiting game to see if Carl would recover adequately, I would wager that the added events to the TV show served to provide an increase in tension. In addition to this, in the comic books, Herschel's family consisted of 3 sons and 4 daughters. His eldest son was named Arnold, followed by his youngest named Billy, and his 4 daughters are Lacey his oldest, Maggie his second oldest, as well as Rachel and Susie. Unlike the show, Herschel does not have a wife here, and she's never mentioned, so we don't really know her fate. Furthermore, Herschel's group is also composed of Otis and his wife Patricia. Regarding Otis, there are a couple of differences and a couple of similarities between the comic and the TV show. In the TV show, Otis is largely depicted as honorable and hardworking, while the comics depict him as somewhat of a simpleton. What I'd also like to draw your attention to is the fact that there is no character named Beth Green in the comics. Her character was actually created explicitly for the show. Another major difference between the comics and the show is the barn. In the TV show, the barn was discovered by Glen and served as a vector for providing us with an answer to what it was that had happened to Sophia following her disappearance. In the comics, the barn being used as a storage place for zombies is actually told to Rick by Herschel himself. Now, where the TV show saw Shane freaking out and claiming that all the walkers in the barn should be killed, and Rick remained clear-headed and tried to reason with Herschel, in the comics, Rick was actually the person losing his mind and claiming that all the zombies needed to die. However, Herschel's rationale for storing the zombies in the barn is the same in both the comics and the show, and that he believes that a time will come when humanity will find a cure for the zombie plague, and when they do, those who have been infected will be returned to a state of normalcy. This logic is fueled by the fact that in the comics, Herschel's second son Sean, a person that we did not list in our initial listing of his sons, was bitten and turned into a zombie. Now, the circumstance surrounding the zombies in the barn and how the release is also different here. In the show, Shane had lost his mind in an effort to force Herschel to face the fact that the zombies couldn't be turned back, but to also take control of the group. In the comics, a zombie had roamed onto the farm, and when Herschel tried to put it into the barn, the other zombies inside the barn began to pour out. In the process, Herschel's eldest son Arnold jumped in to save him and was consumed by the zombies, and while the rest of the group joins in killing the zombies, Herschel's oldest daughter Lacey is attacked as well, resulting in her death. And so in the face of the fact that the zombies are killing various members of his family, Herschel comes to the realization that there is no bringing them back and kills both his zombified son Sean as well as Arnold after he reanimates. Now, in terms of the other elements of the farm, a lot of the things remain relatively the same from the TV show. Glen and Maggie form a relationship, and Herschel actually walked in on the two while they were together, and with the fallout of the group killing all the zombies, Herschel's rationale is the same between the comics and the show. When Rick approaches him with the issue of sleeping in the barn and how it can't be viewed as a long-term option, Herschel's response is that the group can stay until Carl heals, but after that, they have to leave. This sentiment is compounded on when Lori and Herschel get into an argument about the group having to leave. According to Lori, the various weapons provided to Herschel and his group aided in their survival, and if it had not been for Rick's group, Herschel and his ilk would have most likely died while the zombies broke free. But in the eyes of Herschel, he took Rick's group in, provided medical treatment to their son, and in the process, lost 2 of his own. Now, Rick tries to rationalize with Herschel by stating that they had believed that he was allowing them to stay permanently, but with Lori having previously informed him of their pregnancy, and with supplies scarce beyond the farm, the group is almost guaranteed to die, whether by zombies, starvation, or any number of other causes. However, for all of his talk, Herschel refuses to accept Rick's plight, and after pulling a gun on him, Rick accepts Herschel's demands and agrees to leave. Now, this circumstance as it's presented runs in direct contrast to the TV show, which saw Rick's group vacate the farm after it was overrun by a horde of zombies. What I also want to do here is have a discussion about Glen. With the rest of Rick's group leaving after Herschel kicked them out, Glen was allowed to stay after Maggie had spoken to Herschel. Now, this is something I would like you to remember because this will become especially important for Glen's character in the issues of 100 and 101. But with Rick's team heading back out on the road, there eventually comes a point when they run out of gas. Instructing the group to search for abandoned cars that may have gasoline as well as some food and supplies, everyone begins to fan out. Something I'd also like to draw your attention to is that Dale and Andrea have begun a relationship with one another. While this is not the most important thing in the world, I thought it was something worth mentioning if for no other reason than to illustrate the continuing differences between the show and the comic. But while Dale and Andrea are hunting for supplies, they eventually stumble across the prison, something they reveal to Rick and the rest of the group. So where the TV show continued to see a rather large deviation from the source material in the time on Herschel's farm, during the era of the prison and once we get to the section of the governor, we're going to find that the differences begin to increase even further. In the TV show, the group had transitioned to the prison almost immediately after the incident at Herschel's farm, which remained the central location of the events throughout Season 3 and for the first half of Season 4. Following its discovery, like the comics, everyone began preparing the prison for occupation by clearing out the yard along with one of the cell blocks. Where things began to deviate was with the inmates. In the TV show, the inmates were led by a man named Tomas, with the group surviving the end of the world after the guards had locked them into the prison, along with a massive amount of food and supplies. In the comics, the backstory of the inmates was relatively the same, except that a man named Dexter led the group. Now in the comics, like the show, the inmates and Rick's group came into direct conflict when the problem arose of who deserves to live in the prison. Where Rick and his group had cleared out the zombies and viewed the prison as their own, the inmates argued that they had been there the entire time. Now the big difference between the show and the comics is that in the TV show, Tomas had tried to kill Rick, after which he responded by killing Tomas. In the comics, Rick struck first. As an undercurrent to the events leading from the departure in Atlanta up to the prison, various members of the group were starting to question Rick's leadership. One of the members in particular, the wife of Otis named Patricia, had retrieved weapons from the armory in A Block. Intending to launch an insurgency by having Rick killed, Patricia provided weapons to Dexter, who confronted Rick at gunpoint. Demanding that he and his ilk leave, Rick opens the door to A Block and in doing so, releases a horde of zombies. While Dexter initially works with Rick to eliminate the zombie threat, Rick takes the opportunity to kill Dexter. Something else I also want to talk about here is the concept of the pneumonia outbreak in the TV show. In the comics, this never happened. Instead, this seemed to be a kind of substitute for the murder of Herschel's daughters, Rachel and Susie, as well as the death of Tyrese's daughter, Julie. In the comics, following Rick's departure from Herschel's farm and their discovery of the prison, one of the inmates housed within the prison alongside Dexter was a man named Thomas Richards. As he was initially presented, Thomas was quiet and reserved and claimed to have been arrested for tax evasion. However, as the story of the prison progressed and Rick began moving members of Herschel's family to the prison as a safer location, Rachel and Susie were found decapitated. As the story turned into kind of a whodunit mystery, it was eventually revealed that the killer was Thomas when he attempted to kill Andrea while she was doing laundry. After he was imprisoned following this discovery, one of the members of Rick's group sought to release him, but as a consequence was attacked by Thomas almost immediately. Responding to the panic, Maggie had killed Thomas by shooting him to death. And so angry over the death of his daughters, Rachel and Susie, Herschel had requested that Rick throw Thomas's body over the fence and allow him to be consumed by the zombies, something that Rick agreed to. Now regarding Tyrese's daughter Julie, her death actually had nothing to do with Thomas, but was more due to a romantic gesture gone wrong. When a gunshot rang out through the prison, Rick jumps into action by grabbing his gun and investigating. But after arriving at its source, he finds Tyrese cradling his daughter with her boyfriend Chris cowering in the corner. What we're told is that the intention of Chris and Julie was to live together forever, and that they intended to shoot each other at the same time. However, Chris had pulled the trigger before Julie could pull hers, and shot her before she could shoot him. As a result, Rick simply leaves, allowing Tyrese to quite literally choke Chris to death, and after he reanimated, brutalize his body, chop him into pieces, and burn the remains. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to focus more on the relationship, the various dichotomies between Rick and Tyrese, as well as the circumstances that lead to the introduction of the governor. With that being said, I will catch you guys later. Peace.